Hello, it's David Allen and you are watching Sporting Icons.
All right, hope everybody's doing fantastic. So yesterday, I seen that somebody posted something on Twitter and said Joe Joyce versus Luis Ortiz, anyone? Sam Jones, Joe Joyce's manager, replied, no problem. Now, if you don't look too deep into it, you think, oh, great, what a great fight. I hope they get it all done. But that's not really the reality of it. Now, when it comes to, say, Sam Jones, he talks a lot, he says a lot, but ultimately when he's confronted with a certain situation, he does take a backward step, sometimes two or three. A couple of examples would be, say, Solomon Dacres. Sam Jones, of course, manages him. Sam Jones is like, I will take Alan Babbage in a heartbeat and blah, 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 blah. As soon as he's confronted with Alan Babbage saying, okay, we'll do it. Oh, well, maybe in a fight or two's time, kind of see how it goes, blah, 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 blah. He backtracks. Same with his fight to Florian Marku. Sam Jones spoke a lot about Conor Benn. Confronted with it, oh, well, maybe in a couple of fights' time, we'll kind of have to wait and see how it kind of makes sense, blah, blah, blah. It's what Sam Jones does. So my question, firstly, for Sam Jones is, well, what are you going to do about it? It's one thing saying, no problem, and then just leave it alone. That's it. That's easy work. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to put in an offer? I'd watch that fight, wouldn't you? Of course you would. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to approach Al Heyman in the PBC? Instruct Frank Warren to do so? I don't know. Now, Sam Jones, he's very outspoken, and yes, he's a manager, and managers are not really ones who sit up there at the press conferences or do interviews and whatever else, okay? Sam Jones does. And while some people can criticise that, and I understand to a point because he's a bit annoying, but he does it in a way where people will talk about him. And if you're talking about him, you're talking about his fighters. He's kind of doing his job from one perspective, although he is going above and beyond because most managers don't do that. So while managers don't really go up to the press conferences and do the interviews and that, there's nothing wrong with him doing it. There's no law that says he can't do it. So again, but we've kind of been down this road before when it comes to Luis Ortiz and Joe Joyce. A couple of years ago, Joe Joyce saying how he wants Luis Ortiz. And I said at the time, don't talk about it if you ain't going to do it. But at the same time, I did say Joe Joyce, he didn't have many fights. I think he had about 6 or 7 fights at the time. Why would you want to go for Luis Ortiz for? Build up a little bit. Fast forward to now, he's now 13 fights deep. But of course, back then, when Luis Ortiz said, okay, fine, let's do it. Went in a totally different direction. So the fight was there. It was an in-house fight at the time. Joe Joyce was part of the PBC stable under Al Heyman. Joe Joyce, he moves around the world with different companies and, of course, different management and different trainers. He moves more than a pawn on a chessboard, okay? He does do that. So would Al Heyman look at Joe Joyce and go, you left us. Why would we give you a fight with one of our fighters? They could take it a bit personal. I don't really know how Al Heyman feels about that. Of course not. But at the same time, when you look at PBC, they're like their in-house fights. So if that fight was ever really going to happen, it probably would have been when Joe Joyce was under the PBC umbrella. But at the same time, with Joe Joyce, he doesn't have a US-based promoter, so the wrong side of the street shouldn't really come into it. But at the same time, Joe Joyce, he's going to want to fight Luis Ortiz here in the UK, isn't he? That's going to cause a bit of a problem for the PBC. Firstly, because it's not an in-house fight, but secondly, UK time doesn't really sit well, does it, in America? Our time, say, 10, 11 o'clock at night, is there early afternoon. Boxing fans don't really like watching boxing in the afternoon for some reason. I do. Well, whenever there's, say, an Australian fight on, I like watching them early afternoon. It's something different. I don't know why. But America, not so much. But at the same time, also when it comes down to it as well, what kind of sparring would Joe Joyce have? So let's just say, it's unlikely, but let's just say Frank Warren, Sam Jones kind of got together and said, okay, let's get this Luis Ortiz fight. Joe Joyce is like, yeah, okay. They make an offer for Luis Ortiz. The fight's accepted. So that fight will be next. What kind of sparring would Joe Joyce get? You see, this is something that people don't really think about, is the preparation. It's one thing to say, oh, this person should go fight this person, because you're thinking about the fight night. You're not thinking about the preparation. The preparation for Joe Joyce is, well, firstly, I don't believe he's actually fought a southpaw in the professional game yet. How would he get on with it? Personally, I think Joe Joyce would batter him from pillar to post. I think he'd hit him so hard the mummified dust will come flying out of Luis Ortiz's mouth. But at the same time, we don't really know how he's going to get on with southpaws. We know that he's fought them in the amateurs, such as Alexander Usyk and that, but in the professional game, he hasn't. Luis Ortiz, he's been around for a long time, of course. His resume is, let's be honest, very subpar, very, very poor. The only real time he's kind of stepped up was Brian Jennings back in 2015, and then more recently with Deontay Wilder. Of course, he lost both times with Deontay Wilder. Why? Because he still fights as an amateur at times. But what kind of preparation can Joe Joyce get for southpaw sparring? We're not really inundated with southpaw heavyweights here in the UK, are we? And anybody who's kind of good and available for sparring will probably already be part of Anthony Joshua's camp as he's preparing for Alexander Usyk. This is pretty much what it was that I was saying when people were saying how Dillian Whyte should fight Charles Martin. Okay, what sparring can he possibly get? And of course, you can go through the heavyweight and say, well, he's southpaw, he's southpaw, he's southpaw. But you have to remember, a lot of these fighters are rivals. They're potential opponents very soon. So would they come over and help Dillian Whyte? Would they come over and help Joe Joyce? I mean, especially now, because if anybody is really good and available for sparring, as I said, they're already going to be part of Anthony Joshua's camp. Anthony Joshua, of course, he's going to be paying very well for his sparring partners. Again, sparring partners, they don't just come in and as a favour. No, a sparring partner, it doesn't really matter where you are on the ladder of the professional game, you should get paid for sparring, especially if it's for a camp. You should get paid for sparring. And of course, at a bare minimum, your accommodation and your travel expenses at a bare minimum. So anybody who's good, they will already be currently under Anthony Joshua's payroll right now. So who would Joe Joyce go out there and spar? Do you think Otto Wallen would come in? Doubt it. That's a potential opponent. You think Charles Martin would come in? I doubt it. That's a potential opponent. So who does he really get? He's going to have to bring in sparring partners from abroad. Pay for their travel, pay for their expenses, pay for their accommodation, and whatever else. Especially if it's a camp, you have to pay them per day, per week, however much. Which sparring isn't usually too expensive. You're probably looking about, it could be anywhere from a couple of £100 a week up to a couple of grand a week. Okay, but still, would Joe Joyce be okay to go around and bring in all these kind of different sparring partners? Well, we don't know, do we? Because again, we don't really know how Joe Joyce gets on with southpaws. Luis Ortiz, he may well be in his 50s. I mean, officially, he's, 42, 43. But a lot of people who have known Luis Ortiz for a long time, including his old amateur coach said, no, add 10 years to his actual age. But still, even if he is 50, he's a pretty tough 50-year-old, isn't he? But the thing is, would Joe Joyce want Luis Ortiz? I said we've been down this road before when it comes to these guys. Joe Joyce said, yeah, I want Luis Ortiz, I want this guy, I want Big Baby Miller, I want blah, blah, blah. But when it come down to it, went totally quiet when say, Luis Ortiz said, okay, let's do it then. And very, very quiet. But of course, he's been on the receiving end of that as well. He was quite serious when he said he wanted to fight Derek Chisora a couple of years ago. Derek Chisora didn't want anything to do with Joe Joyce. Nothing whatsoever. I don't think Derek Chisora still wants anything to do with Joe Joyce right now, unless, of course, the money is going to be right. But either way, back onto Luis Ortiz. Interesting fight, I think, providing Joe Joyce, well, firstly, he actually tries to get the fight done. Secondly, if he can get some good sparring partners in, I think he absolutely annihilates Luis Ortiz. But again, you could ask the question, I suppose, if he's getting tagged quite a bit by orthodox fighters that you should be quite used to by now, fighting orthodox fighters, what's going to happen when he's fighting a southpaw? He's going to be getting hit flush from the other side. How's he going to cope with that? All these questions will hopefully be answered. For me personally, I'd quite like to see Joe Joyce take on a Luis Ortiz. If not, there are plenty of UK fights I'd like to see him fight. Martin Bakole, Hughie Fury. If not, we can go a little bit into Europe and that. Filip Herkovic, Tony Yoka. What's wrong with these? There's nothing wrong with these kind of fights. So hopefully we get to see Joe Joyce in another good fight, expand on his already very, very impressive resume. 13 fights deep. Very good resume. Very, very good resume. Based on his performance against Carlos Takam, not too impressive, but again, maybe that's just down to the opponent, maybe because Carlos Takam was so much shorter and whatever else. But anyway, food for thought, isn't it? Drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video.